The human walked alone across the strange alien street. The skies above were painted with two suns, and the ground carried dust that sparkled like tiny stars. He was a drifter, a traveler with no real home, always moving from place to place, hoping to survive one more day. He had come to this alien city by mistake, a place where humans were rare and often looked at with cold eyes. The towers were tall and covered with glowing vines, and creatures with 4 arms and glowing eyes moved around without caring for him. No one wanted to speak with a human. No one cared if he stayed or left. As he walked near the old ruins of a park, he heard a soft sound, a whimper, almost like the cry of a child. His steps slowed, and his heart felt heavy. He followed the sound until he reached a broken fountain. There he saw her, a small alien child sitting alone, her skin soft blue, her big dark eyes filled with tears. She was trying to hide, her little hands covering her face. No one was near. The crowds passed by but ignored her, as if she was invisible. The human's chest tightened, for he had seen children cry before on Earth, and no matter the world, a child's tears always felt the same. He moved closer, his boots crunching on the broken stones. The child looked up, afraid at first, but her tears made her weak. She sniffled and whispered something in her alien tongue. He did not understand, but he understood her pain. Slowly, he reached into his small travel bag. He had no riches, no power, no weapons worth showing, but he carried one thing, a small human toy, a bubble blaster he had kept since his younger days. A simple thing, powered by liquid and air. He knelt down in front of the child, smiled softly, and lifted the toy with a gentle squeeze. The blaster released a stream of shimmering bubbles into the air. The bubbles floated, glowing as they caught the twin suns above. The child blinked. Her crying stopped for a moment. Her eyes widened as she followed the bubbles drifting around her. One touched her nose and burst with a tiny shimmer. She gasped, then let out a soft laugh, a sound pure and sweet. The human laughed quietly too, sending more bubbles into the sky. They floated like fragile worlds, each one reflecting colors unknown. The little alien clapped her hands, her sadness forgotten for a brief moment, her giggles echoing in the ruined park. For the first time in many days, the human felt warmth in his chest, as if this small act had given his life meaning again. He had nothing else to give, no power to change worlds, but he could make a child smile. Yet the moment did not remain hidden. Shadows moved along the edges of the park. Tall figures with armor and glowing spears appeared. Their eyes locked on the child and the human before her, their voices sharp as they shouted. The human felt the sudden shift. He realized this child was not just anyone. The guards rushed forward, surrounding them, their spears pointed at the human. The little girl gasped and tried to reach for him, but the soldiers pushed him back. He raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. The leader of the guards spoke with authority, his alien tongue sharp and commanding. The child shouted back in protest, her voice trembling but strong. She pointed at the human, repeating words the guards did not wish to hear. The human did not understand the language, but he could read the scene. He had touched something forbidden, crossed a line he never knew existed. His heart raced, for he was in danger now. The air grew cold as silence fell. Then another sound came. Heavy footsteps, slow and powerful. Every guard straightened, their heads bowed in respect. From behind the armored wall came a tall figure, cloaked in black and silver, her eyes burning with authority, her crown shimmering with strange fire. The human's breath caught. He understood without words. This was the queen, the mother of the child. Her presence was enough to freeze his blood. The little girl ran to her, tugging at her cloak, pointing back at the human, her voice filled with excitement, trying to explain. The queen's gaze fell on the human, sharp as a blade. She saw his hands empty, the strange toy in his grip, and the bubble still floating in the air, her face unreadable, part anger, part curiosity. The guards waited for her command. The human knelt on the ground, bowing his head. his heart pounding. He had only wanted to make a child smile, yet he had drawn the eyes of a queen. And in that single moment, his fate began to change. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The queen stood tall before them, her cloak moving like living shadows. The air grew heavy, as if the very world bent to her will. The guards bowed low, their glowing spears pressed to the ground. Silence spread across the ruined park. Only the faint shimmer of bubbles drifted between them. The human remained on his knees, his head lowered, his breath shallow. He had faced storms, hunger, and war, but never had he felt so small. The queen's eyes were bright and sharp, burning like stars. They searched him as though she could see through his soul. The small alien child clung to her mother's arm, her voice soft but eager. She pulled at the queen's cloak and pointed at the human. Her words rushed and quick. She was trying to explain what had happened. The guards murmured, their eyes full of suspicion and anger. To them, a human near the royal child was danger, a crime that deserved punishment. Some even raised their spears higher, ready to strike if the queen gave the order. But the queen did not move. Her gaze remained locked on the strange device in the human's hand. The bubble blaster. She watched the last few bubbles float away into the twin skies, her expression unreadable, part wonder, part warning. Finally she spoke, her voice deep and smooth, carrying power that silenced even the wind. Her words rolled across the air, and though the human could not understand her language, he felt the weight of every sound. The child interrupted, stepping forward bravely, her small hand reaching out to the human. Her eyes shone with innocence. She repeated a word again and again, pointing to the bubbles and then to him. The human realized she was saying, "Friend." The queen's sharp gaze shifted to her daughter, surprise flickering for just a moment. Then her eyes returned to the kneeling man. She lifted her hand and the guards froze. None dared move. The human raised his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. Fear held him tight, but he forced his voice steady. He spoke in the only way he could, words simple and honest. "I meant no harm," he said softly. She was crying. "I only wanted to help." The queen tilted her head. She could not understand his tongue, yet something in his voice carried truth. The child pulled at her mother again, her voice urgent, repeating, "Friend, friend," until her small body trembled with need. The queen's face softened, only slightly. Enough for the guards to lower their spears, but not enough for them to relax. She studied the human for a long silence, the tension pressing on his shoulders like a mountain. At last she spoke again, her hand motioning toward the palace towers that gleamed in the distance. The guards obeyed instantly. They moved to surround the human. But their weapons no longer aimed to strike. Instead, they stood ready to guide. The human looked from the queen to the child, uncertain. Was he being spared or simply taken away to die in a more private place? His chest tightened, but when the child ran to his side and grabbed his hand, he felt a flicker of hope. The queen allowed it, her sharp eyes never leaving him. Then she turned with a sweep of her cloak, her steps commanding, her presence like thunder. The guards marched, the human and child pulled into their circle. The path to the palace was long and strange. Glowing bridges arched over rivers of silver light. Statues of alien warriors stared down from great pillars. Every eye in the city turned toward the human. Whispers spread like fire. "A human walks with the queen." The human felt each glance like a blade. Some were filled with hate, some with confusion, none with kindness. He held the child's hand tighter. She looked up at him and smiled, as if she did not care about the world, only the simple joy of her friend. When they reached the palace gates, he stopped in awe. The doors were higher than any building he had ever seen, carved with symbols glowing softly. Creatures of stone guarded the entrance, their eyes alive with hidden power. The queen did not pause. With a gesture the gates opened, the sound deep and heavy. The human was led inside, into a hall so vast it seemed endless. The floor shimmered like black glass. The ceiling sparkled with artificial stars. The queen climbed the throne steps and sat with grace. her crown catching the light, her presence filling the room with unshakable command. The guards pulled the human to the center of the hall, leaving him alone in the circle of light. The child ran to her throne and climbed beside her, but she pointed at the human again, her voice loud and strong, repeating the same word with pride. "Friend," the courtiers gasped. Their whispers sharp and mocking. A human could not be friend. A human was weak. A human was nothing. But the queen raised her hand and the hall fell silent. Her gaze burned into him again. Her lips curved slightly, almost into a smile, yet her voice when it came was stern. She gave a command, her words ringing across the chamber. The guards looked surprised but obeyed. They did not chain him. They did not strike him. Instead they gestured for him to follow deeper into the palace. The human understood nothing of her language. But one thing was clear, the queen had spared him for now. As he walked under the watchful eyes of the palace, he felt the weight of fate pressing upon him. The child had saved him with her laughter. The queen had chosen to keep him alive. But he did not know if this path led to honor or to doom. And so with each step, his fate grew darker and more uncertain. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The palace was like another world. Its walls pulsed with faint light as if alive. Great banners of silver and black hung from the ceiling, and shadows moved across the corners as though they were watching. The human walked slowly, his boots echoing on the glassy floor. Every step reminded him that he did not belong here. Courtiers dressed in flowing robes stopped their whispers only to sneer at him, their eyes sharp with dislike. To them he was dirt, a creature from a weak and forgotten race. But the child, the little alien princess, ran happily beside him, her small hand never letting go of his. She laughed as if this dark palace was only a playground. She pulled at his arm, pointing at the pia glowing patterns on the walls, trying to share her joy with him. The human smiled faintly, though his heart was heavy. For every eye in the palace carried suspicion. He could feel danger pressing in from all sides. At last, the guards brought him into a vast chamber, a room filled with nobles, soldiers, and scholars. The queen sat on her throne of black stone, her crown glowing faintly in the dim light, her gaze cold and sharp. The human bowed, his hands empty, showing he carried no threat. The child spoke quickly, her words tumbling out with excitement. She pointed again and again at the human and the small toy he carried. The courtiers laughed cruelly, their voices echoing in the chamber. They mocked the idea that a human could amuse the princess. They called him weak, fragile, unworthy. But the queen silenced them with a single wave of her hand, her eyes never leaving the human. She leaned forward, her voice deep. She gave a command to the guards. One of the scholars stepped forward, translating for the human in broken words. The queen demanded proof of his heart. She wished to see if this fragile creature had courage, if he could show more than cheap tricks with bubbles. The human's throat tightened. He understood the meaning even if not all the words. A test, a trial, something designed to break him. He looked at the child, her wide eyes filled with worry. She shook her head, clutching her mother's cloak, but the queen did not bend, her face like stone. The guards moved, pulling the human away from the chamber, dragging him toward a gate that shimmered with blue fire. Behind it lay the royal gardens, a place of beauty and danger. The nobles whispered eagerly. They wanted him to fail, to be torn apart. They wanted proof that humans were useless. The queen watched without speaking, her eyes like a storm. The human stepped through the gate. The air shifted instantly. The garden was no gentle paradise. Tall plants with glowing thorns towered around him. Rivers of silver liquid cut through the ground, and strange cries echoed in the distance. The guards locked the gate behind him. The nobles pressed to the edges to watch. The queen remained on her throne, her eyes never moving from him. The child hid her face in her hands, whispering words too soft for anyone to hear. The human breathed deeply. Fear gnawed at him, but he knew he had no choice. He had survived many dangers before. Wars, hunger, storms. He would have to survive this too. A low growl rolled through the garden. A shadow shifted between the plants. Then another, and another. Glowing eyes appeared in the darkness. Creatures with scales like armor and jaws filled. With jagged teeth stepped forward, their bodies huge, their movements slow but deadly. The nobles cheered, already certain of the end. The human's heart raced. He had no sword, no shield, only his wits and the small toy in his hand. The first beast lunged, its roar shaking the ground. The human rolled aside, grabbing a broken branch. He swung it with all his strength. It cracked against the beast's snout. Enough to make it stagger, but not enough to kill. The other beasts circled him, their glowing eyes burning. His chest heaved, sweat poured down his back. In panic, he lifted the bubble blaster. Almost without thinking, he squeezed, and glowing bubbles filled the air once more. For a heartbeat, the monsters froze, their alien eyes following the strange shimmering orbs. Confusion flashed in their gaze. The human saw his chance. He threw rocks, distracted them, ran between the plants, using the bubbles to mislead and delay. The nobles gasped. They had expected screams, not tricks. The queen leaned forward, her face unreadable. The battle raged across the garden. The human used every scrap of his mind, every trick of survival. He did not fight with strength, but with cleverness, with speed, with courage. At last the beasts grew weary. Backing into the shadows, growling in frustration, the garden grew quiet again. His body shook, his arms bruised, his legs cut by thorns, but he was still standing. Alive, the gate opened. The guards pulled him back into the chamber. The nobles stared in disbelief, their whispers now sharp with confusion. The child ran to him, her eyes full of pride, hugging his arm. The queen sat silent, her gaze colder than before, yet in her eyes there was something new, not anger, not hatred, but the faintest spark of curiosity. The human stood before her, his chest rising and falling, his bubble blaster still in his hand, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. The queen leaned back on her throne, her lips curling into the smallest, sharpest smile. She had wanted to test him, and he had survived. But the test was only the beginning. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The garden gate closed behind the human with a sound like thunder. The air inside was heavy and strange. Glowing plants stretched high above, their vines twisting like serpents. The ground was damp and soft, carrying the smell of wild earth. Stood still for a moment, listening. The silence was broken only by the drip of silver water and the faint hiss of leaves moving without wind. He knew this was no ordinary garden. It was a cage, a place built for trials. From the high walls above, nobles gathered to watch, their voices a mix of laughter and cruel expectation. They leaned forward to see how long a human would last. The queen sat upon her throne, calm as stone, while her daughter pressed against the railing, her small hands gripping it tightly. The human's body ached from past battles, his clothes torn, his hands bleeding, but he lifted his head and forced his breath steady. He had survived too much to fall without trying. A deep rumble shook the ground. He turned quickly, eyes wide. From the thick vines came movement, shadows shifting. The growls grew louder, and then the first beast appeared. It was massive, its body covered in scales that shimmered like metal, its teeth long and sharp. Its four legs carried claws that could cut stone. Its eyes glowed yellow, filled with hunger. Another roar came from the left. Then from the right, more beasts emerged, 3, then 4, circling him, their heavy bodies crushing plants underfoot. The nobles shouted with excitement, their laughter sharp and cruel. The human gripped a broken branch, weak compared to their size. His chest tightened, his heart thundered. He knew strength alone would not save him. He needed to think, to act, to use what little he had. The first beast lunged, its jaws snapping. He rolled to the side, the ground tearing beneath its bite. He scrambled up and swung the branch, striking its eye. The beast roared in pain, staggering back. The crowd gasped, surprised he had even landed a hit. The others closed in, their growls shaking the garden. The human reached into his bag with desperate hands, pulling out the only tool he had. The bubble blaster. It was foolish, a toy, but it was all he carried. He raised it, squeezed, and the air filled with shimmering orbs, glowing spheres floating gently in the chaos. The beasts paused, their glowing eyes following the bubbles. They tilted their heads, confused by the fragile lights. One snapped at them, only for the bubble to burst softly against its nose. The child princess gasped, her laughter echoing above. She clapped her hands, shouting with joy. "Friend!" Her voice rang through the chamber. The queen's eyes narrowed, but she did not look away. Her gaze locked on the human. He moved quickly. Using the beast's confusion, he ran toward the river of silver water, leaping across stones, throwing rocks to draw the creatures away. The bubbles distracted them, giving him precious moments. One beast charged. He ducked under its massive body, grabbing a sharp vine and slashing its side. The beast roared in rage. The crowd cheered louder. Another lunged, claws swiping. He stumbled, pain tearing across his shoulder, blood dripping. But he forced himself up, firing bubbles into its face. The orbs caught the twin suns above, glowing brighter, dazzling the beast for a brief instant. The fight dragged on, his body breaking, his mind racing. He used everything: stones, branches, vines, tricks of light and sound. He never gave in, even when the beasts grew more furious, even when his own strength faded. At last the beasts slowed, their growls turning to low hisses, their bodies scarred, their eyes burning with frustration. One by one they backed into the shadows, leaving him standing alone, covered in cuts and blood, but alive. The nobles fell silent, their laughter gone, replaced with whispers. Disbelief spread like fire. A human had faced the trial and survived. The gate opened slowly. The guards stepped inside. They did not mock him now. They looked at him with wary eyes, even respect. They led him back into the throne chamber, his legs weak but unbroken. The child princess ran to him, her eyes wide with pride. She wrapped her small arms around him, ignoring the blood and dirt. Her voice rang clear. "Friend!" Again and again, the nobles protested, shouting in anger, claiming it was luck, claiming it was unworthy. But the queen raised her hand. Silence fell instantly. She looked down at the human, her face unreadable, her sharp gaze filled with thought. For the first time she saw more than weakness. She saw cunning, courage, something her people had overlooked. The human bowed, breathing hard, his bubble blaster still in his hand. The queen's lips curved into the faintest smile, cold and dangerous. He had passed her test, but she was not finished with him yet. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The palace celebrated the end of the trial with uneasy silence. Nobles still whispered in disbelief. Guards exchanged uncertain glances, and the human stood trembling but alive in the circle of light. The child princess clung to his arm proudly, refusing to let go. The queen's eyes never left him, her sharp gaze deep as an ocean. She had seen him survive where no human should. She had seen her daughter smile for the first time in many moons, yet she remained still, her thoughts locked away behind her crown of fire. The chamber should have been safe, yet the air grew heavy. The torches flickered strangely, and the sound of footsteps echoed beyond the tall doors. Guards stiffened, their hands tightening on glowing spears. Then the crash came. The gates of the chamber burst open with violent force. A storm of smoke and sparks poured in. Armored figures rushed through, their armor darker, their weapons sharper, their banners marked with a rival crest. The nobles screamed, scattering. The queen rose at once, her voice sharp with command. Her guards formed lines to defend her. But the intruders were fast, striking with blades of light. They cut through defenders with merciless skill. The child princess screamed, clinging to the human side. He felt his blood run cold. He had survived beasts, but this was worse. These were killers. They wanted the queen. They wanted the throne. But most of all, their eyes locked on the child. One shouted in a tongue harsh and sharp, pointing at the princess, "Take her," his voice echoed. The human's body moved before thought. He grabbed the child, pulling her close. His legs carried him toward the shadows of the chamber. Arrows of light struck the ground near his feet. The air burned with energy. The child cried out in fear. Her small voice shaking, he whispered quickly, "Hold tight, don't let go," though she could not understand his words. She understood his tone. Her arms wrapped around his neck. The intruders spread wide, cutting down guards. The queen fought at the front, her cloak blazing like fire. Her voice filled the air like thunder. She struck with a blade of silver light. Each movement strong and deadly, but even she was outnumbered. The human ducked under a falling beam, his body aching from wounds not yet healed. He knew he could not fight with swords. He had no power, only courage, and one small toy still clutched. In his hand, he lifted the bubble blaster, firing quickly. Streams of glowing orbs filled the air. The attackers stopped for a brief second, confused. Some swiped at the bubbles, breaking them in bursts of harmless light. That second was enough. The human grabbed a loose stone and hurled it, striking one in the helmet. The figure stumbled. Giving him a path to escape, he sprinted down a side hall, the princess clinging tightly. Behind him the chamber shook with war. The queen's voice roared commands. Her soldiers rallied. But he knew the intruders would chase him. Their true prize was in his arms. His boots pounded across the glowing floor. The palace walls seemed endless, every corner filled with strange shadows. He could hear footsteps chasing, their voices sharp. He turned a corner, almost falling, his breath ragged. The princess whispered his name, or at least something close to it. Her voice trembling but full of trust. It gave him strength to keep moving. The sound of metal rang behind him. Attackers closing in. He fired more bubbles, filling the narrow corridor with shimmering lights. The glowing spheres floated like a wall, slowing the enemy for moments. He ducked into a side chamber, heart hammering. He pressed his back to the wall. Holding the princess close, he listened. The sounds of battle filled the palace. Screams, roars, the clash of steel. From the chamber's high window he saw the city below. Flames rising, shadows of more enemies storming the streets. This was no small attack, it was war. The princess buried her face against him. Trembling, he held her tighter, whispering gently though his own fear burned, "I will keep you safe." Door burst open, enemies pouring in. He had no choice. He ran to the center, grabbed a fallen spear from the floor, and stood ready, the bubble blaster in one hand, the spear in the other. The intruders laughed at the sight, mocking him. But when the first rushed forward, he stabbed with desperate strength. The spear struck. True, the enemy fell. The others grew cautious, no longer laughing. The queen's guards finally stormed in behind them, clashing in fierce battle. The human shielded the princess, dragging her behind a broken pillar, his body shaking with exhaustion. The fight ended with blood and fire, the intruders retreating. But their threat was not gone. The queen entered the chamber, her face pale but burning with fury, her blade dripping. Her eyes fell on the human, the princess still safe in his arms. She froze, her breath sharp. For the first time her expression cracked. Relief flickered across her face. The child reached to her mother, but she still clung to the human with equal strength, her small voice whispering again and again, "Friend, friend." The nobles, shaken and pale, whispered to one another, their fear louder than their pride. They had seen him defend the princess. They had seen him stand where many had fallen. The queen stepped forward, her cloak heavy with battle smoke. She looked down at the human, and for the first time her voice softened, a single word falling like a command and a gift. "Protector," she said. The hall grew silent, every noble staring, every guard bowing. The human's fate had shifted once more. But deep in the shadows, the enemy's vow still echoed. The attack was only the beginning. The dark threat was not over. It had just begun. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The palace still shook from the battle. Smoke drifted through the high halls. The wounded were carried away. and the cries of soldiers echoed far into the night. The queen stood tall in the center of the throne chamber, her crown glowing faintly. Like fire, her cloak torn from combat, the human stood before her, weary and bruised, his arms holding the princess close, his body trembling but unbroken, his bubble blaster still in his hand. He looked like nothing compared to her soldiers. Yet he had done what few of them could. He had kept the princess alive. The nobles surrounded the chamber, their whispers sharp as knives. Some demanded his punishment, some feared his rise. All of them hated the thought that a human had saved. The air, they spoke words dripping with jealousy, claiming it was chance, claiming it was luck. The queen silenced them with one gesture. Her eyes narrowed. She looked at the man who had risked his life. She looked at the princess who clung to him like she would never let go. Her daughter's eyes were brighter than they had been in years, filled with laughter, filled with trust. The queen spoke in her deep voice, commanding the scholar to translate. Her words were slow, measured, sharp with meaning. She said that the human had shown courage where others had shown fear. She said that his weakness of body was balanced by strength of heart. She said that his kindness had done what no sword could. The human bowed his head, unsure if her words were a gift or a warning. He did not know if she meant to honor him or to chain him in duty. The princess broke the silence, her voice small but clear. She stood before the throne and said one word again and again. "Friend, friend," her hands pointing to the human. Her eyes shining, the queen watched her child for a long moment. Her stern face softened slightly, but her voice when it came was firm. She said the human could no longer be left free. His life had touched hers, his fate had touched the throne. And that could not be undone. The nobles gasped, thinking she meant to end his life. The guards tightened their grip on their spears. But then the queen spoke again, her words rolling like thunder. She named him not prisoner, not slave but protector. The hall erupted with shock. The courtiers shouted, calling it madness, calling it insult. They demanded a trial, they demanded his death. But the queen rose from her throne, her tall frame casting shadows across them all. Her voice silenced the chamber instantly. She said the empire was at war. She said enemies gathered in the dark. She said strength of the body had failed too many times. But strength of the heart was rare. She would not waste it. The human lifted his head, his chest heavy. He could not understand all her words. But the scholar translated enough. Protector, guardian of the princess. Bound to the throne, his life forever changed. The queen turned to him, her eyes sharp as blades. She asked through the scholar if he would accept. His heart pounded, his mind raced. He thought of the battles he had faced, the pain of his past, the loneliness of his wandering. He thought of the child who had laughed at his bubbles, who had called him friend. Slowly, he nodded, his voice rough but clear. "Yes," he said, his choice given freely. The princess smiled, her joy filling the chamber. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around him. Her laughter rang like music. The queen watched, her gaze still hard yet behind. Yet there was something new, a small spark of trust. The nobles bowed their heads in frustration. The guards struck their spears to the ground. The choice was made. The word of the queen was law. The human was led away, not as a prisoner, but as a guest of honor. The halls that once whispered against him now echoed with his footsteps. Every noble's eyes followed him, some filled with hatred, some with fear, but none with laughter. That night he was given a chamber within the palace, high windows opening to the twin suns, soft lights glowing in the walls. He sat alone for a long time, staring at the bubble blaster in his hands. He wondered how something so small had brought him here. The princess visited him secretly, carrying food in her tiny arms. She giggled as she entered. Sitting beside him, she tugged at his sleeve, asking him to blow bubbles again, and he did, filling the room with shimmering orbs, her laughter chasing away the weight in his heart. Far across the palace, the queen stood alone at her window, her eyes on the burning horizon. She knew the attack was only the beginning. Her enemies would return, stronger, crueler. She whispered to herself that the human's fate was now tied to hers. Whether he lived or died would shape the destiny of the empire. The stars above shone like watchers. The city below glowed with quiet fire. And in the heart of it all, a wandering human had been chosen, not by luck, not by chance, but by the will of a queen and the love of a child. And though he had accepted, he did not yet know the weight of what it truly meant. His choice was only the beginning. His fate now belonged not to himself, but to a throne, a crown, and a child who called him friend. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. The palace was quiet after the storm of battle, its high halls no longer filled with shouts, but with whispers that drifted like smoke. The nobles still spoke in secret corners, angry that a human had been given such an honor, afraid of what it meant for the empire. The human walked the palace corridors in silence, his boots echoing against the glowing floor. Guards followed him, not as jailers, but as watchers. Their eyes sharp and cold, every step reminded him that he was no longer a wanderer. He was something else now, something heavier. The princess skipped beside him, her laughter breaking the silence, her small hands tugging at his sleeve. She asked for bubbles again, and he smiled faintly, lifting the small toy. Shimmering orbs filled the air, drifting like tiny worlds. The child clapped and giggled, her joy lighting the corridor brighter than any torch. Servants stopped to watch. Some smiled despite themselves. Others turned away in disapproval. But no one could deny the truth. The princess was happy. And she had not been happy for a long time. That night, the queen summoned him to her private chamber. The guards opened the tall silver doors, and he entered, the air heavy with the scent of burning oils. The queen sat by the window, her crown set aside, her face shadowed by the twin moons. She looked at him not as a prisoner, not even as a guest, but as something in between. Her voice was calm, her words translated by the scholar who stood nearby. She said the empire was entering dark times. Enemies gathered beyond the stars. The throne would be tested, and so would her daughter. She turned her sharp eyes to him, asking if he understood the weight of what he had accepted. His silence was heavy, but then he nodded slowly, his voice low. I will protect her, no matter the cost. The queen studied him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she gave a single nod, as if sealing a pact. Her words came soft but strong. She said fate had chosen him, and fate could not be undone. The days that followed were filled with change. The human trained with the queen's soldiers, his body bruised, his arms cut. But he never gave up. He learned their weapons, their movements, their ways of war. Though his strength was less, his courage carried him further. The princess never left his side. She laughed when he fell, cheered when he stood again, her small voice calling him friend again and again. Her joy gave him strength when his body wanted to break. The nobles continued to whisper, some plotting, some waiting. But the queen watched from her throne, her eyes sharp, her thoughts hidden. She knew their envy, she knew their fear, yet she did not stop. She let the human grow into the role she had given him one night. The dark threat returned, not with armies, but with shadows. Assassins slipped into the palace, their blades aimed for the child, their silence sharper than any roar. The human woke to the sound of a window breaking. He moved without thought, shielding the princess with his body. The assassin struck fast, but he fought back, with fists, with broken furniture, with anything he could reach. He bled, he stumbled, but he did not fall when the guards finally arrived. The assassins lay broken, the princess still safe in his arms. The queen came at once, her cloak flowing like storm clouds. She looked at him, his body cut and battered, the child clinging to his chest, her small hands shaking, her voice whispering, friend, again and again. For the first time, the queen's stern face broke. She placed her hand on his shoulder, firm but gentle, her voice low. Protect her, she said once more, but this time it was not command, it was respect. The story spread through the empire. Whispers turned to tales, Thales turned to legend. A human who had faced beasts, war, and shadows. A human who had protected the air with nothing but courage and a toy of bubbles. The nobles who had mocked him now spoke his name with caution. Soldiers who had doubted him now nodded with respect. The people who had ignored his presence now looked at him with wonder. And yet, the human himself felt no pride. He sat with the princess each night, blowing bubbles into the air, watching her laugh, watching her eyes light with joy. He knew that was his true reward, not honor, not power, but her smile. The queen watched from afar, her thoughts hidden behind her crown. But deep in her heart she knew, this man had changed the empire, not with strength, but with kindness, not with weapons, but with heart. He had come as a wanderer, a drifter with nothing. He had given a child laughter, and in return, he had been given a fate heavier than any crown. Now his story was bound to theirs forever, his life tied to the throne, his courage woven into the future of a kingdom, and all of it began with bubbles, asterisk, 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 asterisk.